Hi, I'm Jessica. 2 weeks ago, I watched my 8-month-old daughter Emma collapse into violent seizures on the buffet table at my father's retirement party. Formula dripping from her tiny lips that my own sister Rachel had just fed her, while paramedics fought to save my baby's life in front of 70 horrified guests. Rachel stood behind the dessert table with this eerily calm expression and whispered to our cousin, "Maybe Jessica will finally understand that not everyone gets to have perfect little families." Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. What she didn't know was that my husband David wasn't just another Pentagon desk officer. He was a colonel in military intelligence with direct access to resources that could move mountains when his family was threatened. And when that emergency call reached him during Emma's life-or-death surgery, the response wasn't just immediate, it was overwhelming. What happened next didn't just destroy Rachel's carefully constructed life, it exposed a network of medical device fraud that reached into some of the most trusted hospitals in America. Keep watching because the phone call that changed everything happened at exactly 9:23 p.m., and by sunrise, my sister was facing federal agents who'd been tracking her movements for months without her knowing. The Virginia humidity in late September carries a different kind of weight when you're juggling a fussy baby and trying to look presentable for family obligations. Emma had been having trouble with her evening feedings all week, spitting up more than usual and fighting sleep with the kind of persistent crying that makes you question every parenting decision you've ever made. I'd called Doc Patterson twice, but she kept reassuring me it was probably just a developmental phase. Maybe some mild reflux from trying new foods. Nothing unusual for an 8-month-old, she said. Trust your instincts but don't overthink every little thing, she said. I should have pushed harder for answers. The townhouse in Alexandria felt impossibly quiet during the day with David deployed to his classified assignment overseas. Every creak of the settling foundation, every neighbor's car door slamming seemed amplified in the stillness that had become my constant companion. We'd chosen this place specifically because it was close to the Pentagon, safe, filled with military families who understood the rhythm of deployments and homecomings, who brought meals when babies were born and folded flags when service members didn't come home. Mrs. Rodriguez next door had been especially thoughtful since Emma arrived, always checking if I needed anything from the commissary or offering to watch the baby while I grabbed a shower. She'd raised 3 children through multiple deployments herself, and there was something comforting about her matter-of-fact approach to the challenges of military life. The neighborhood was exactly what we'd wanted when we started planning our family. Tree-lined streets where children rode bicycles safely, where neighbors knew each other's names and looked out for each other's kids. The kind of community that made the loneliness of solo parenting bearable, where being a military spouse wasn't something you had to explain or defend. But family gatherings were different. Family came mid-history and expectations, and the kind of complicated dynamics that couldn't be solved with casseroles and good intention. Dad's retirement party had been planned for months, a celebration of 35 years of faithful service with the postal system, complete with a reserved room at the VFW hall and enough food to feed half of Arlington. He'd earned this recognition, this moment of pride surrounded by colleagues and family members who respected his dedication and reliability. Mom had spent weeks organizing every detail, from the slideshow of his career highlights to the custom cake decorated with Postal Service emblems. This was supposed to be his day, a joyful transition into the next chapter of his life. Rachel had volunteered to help with the food service, which should have been my first warning sign. My sister had never shown interest in family events unless they provided some advantage for her networking or professional advancement. She worked in medical device sales, specializing in cardiovascular equipment, and she had a talent for turning any social gathering into an opportunity to make connections that might benefit her commission structure. Her success in sales came from an ability to read people quickly, to identify what they needed to hear and then deliver exactly that message with perfect timing and genuine seeming sincerity. I arrived at the VFW hall around 5 o'clock, Emma bundled in her car seat and a diaper bag loaded with enough supplies for a week-long expedition. The hall was already buzzing with activity as Dad's former colleagues and longtime friends filtered in, sharing stories and catching up on family news. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows created a warm, celebratory atmosphere that made me momentarily forget about my concerns over Emma's recent fussiness. Rachel was stationed behind the buffet table, wearing a navy blue dress that struck the perfect balance between professional and family appropriate, directing the catering staff with the same efficiency she brought to her sales presentation. She looked up when I entered and flashed that practiced smile that had convinced countless medical professionals to purchase her company's products. "Jessica, You made it. She came around the table to greet us, her heels clicking against the polished floor with authority. Let me see this beautiful baby. She's gotten so big since I saw her last month. I lifted Emma from her car seat, conscious of how the baby's recent fussiness had left me looking more frazzled than I preferred for family events. Emma was alert and curious, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with those serious dark eyes that reminded everyone of David's intense focus. She's been a little difficult this week, I admitted, bouncing Emma gently as she started to make the whimpering sounds that usually preceded a full crying session. Dr. Patterson thinks it might be a growth spurt, but she's been rejecting her bottles and not sleeping well. Rachel's expression shifted to one of professional concern, the same look I'd seen her use when discussing technical specifications with hospital administrators. Have you tried adjusting her formula concentration? Sometimes babies need different nutritional ratios as they develop, especially if they're going through growth spurts. The suggestion sounded reasonable, delivered with the confidence of someone who dealt with medical issues professionally every day. Rachel had
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Always been quick to offer solutions, to position herself as the family member with specialized knowledge that could solve whatever problems the rest of us were too inexperienced to handle properly. I hadn't thought of that, I said, feeling immediately inadequate for not considering such an obvious possibility. Her pediatrician just said to stick with the current feeding schedule. Pediatricians are great for general guidance, but they don't always stay current on the latest nutritional research, Rachel said, reaching out to touch Emma's cheek with one perfectly manicured finger. I work with neonatal units all the time through my medical device sale. The feeding protocols have become much more sophisticated in the past few years. Emma turned toward Rachel's touch instinctively, and Rachel smiled with what appeared to be genuine affection. She's so perfect, Jessica. You're so lucky to have such a beautiful, healthy baby. Some people spend years trying to have what you've got right here. There was something in her tone that made me look at her more carefully, but before I could analyze it further, Dad appeared at my elbow, beaming with pride and ready to show off his granddaughter to everyone in the room. The next hour passed in a blur of introductions and conversations, with Emma being passed between various family members and longtime friends who cooed over her development and marveled at how much she resembled Dave. The party was exactly what Dad had hoped for, a warm celebration filled with laughter and stories from colleagues who'd worked alongside him for decades. Mom flitted between groups of guests, making sure everyone had enough food and drink, clearly in her element as the hostess of such a successful event. I found myself relaxing for the first time in days, enjoying the normalcy of family celebration and the brief respite from the isolation of solo parenting. Around 7 o'clock, Emma started getting fussy again, making the overtired sounds that indicated she was ready for her evening bottle and probably a diaper change. I gathered her things and headed toward the small side room that Mom had designated as a nursing area, but Rachel intercepted me near the buffet table. Let me help, she said, reaching for the diaper bag with practiced efficiency. I mixed up a fresh bottle for her using some premium formula samples I brought from work. The neonatal units I visit swear by this particular brand for fussy babies. She handed me a bottle filled with what looked like Emma's usual formula, slightly warmer than I typically served it, but otherwise identical to what I'd been feeding her at home. The bottle was labeled with familiar brand markings, and the consistency looked exactly right for her age and dietary needs. This is really thoughtful of you, I said, accepting the bottle gratefully. What makes this formula different from what I've been using? It's the same base formula, just with some additional probiotics and digestive enzymes that help with absorption, Rachel explained, her voice taking on the educational tone she used when training medical staff on new equipment. The samples aren't available to the general public yet, but the clinical results have been remarkable for babies with feeding difficulties. Emma latched onto the bottle immediately, drinking with more enthusiasm than she'd shown for any feeding in the past week. The relief I felt watching her empty the bottle so eagerly was overwhelming. Maybe Rachel was right about the nutritional adjustment. Maybe I'd been overthinking Emma's fussiness when the solution was simply a matter of better formula composition. She loves it, I said, feeling genuinely grateful for Rachel's expertise and willingness to help. Where did you say these samples came from? One of the neonatal units at Children's National, Rachel replied, already turning back toward the buffet table where other guests needed attention. I'll get you some more samples to take home. No point in struggling with feeding issues when there are better options available. I carried Emma to the quiet side room and changed her diaper, noting how much more relaxed she seemed after finishing the bottle. For the first time in days, she wasn't fighting or fussing, just looking around with alert curiosity and making the soft cooing sounds that always melted my heart. Maybe Rachel's intervention was exactly what we'd needed. Maybe I'd been too quick to dismiss simple solutions in favor of worrying about complex problems that didn't actually exist. By the time I returned to the main party area, Emma was drowsy and content, the kind of peaceful baby that made other parents envious. Dad was giving an impromptu speech thanking everyone for celebrating with him, and Mom was circulating with a camera, capturing moments that would become part of the family's collective memory of this milestone day. I found a quiet chair near the back of the room, and settled in to let Emma rest while enjoying the remainder of Dad's celebration. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, casting everything in golden light that made the gathering feel warm and timeless. This was what family was supposed to be about, I thought. Supporting each other through life's transitions, sharing expertise and resources, creating positive memories that would last for years. Emma's breathing had settled into the deep, regular rhythm that indicated she was falling into genuine sleep, not the restless dozing that had characterized her recent naps. I felt my own tension beginning to ease for the first time in days. Maybe Rachel was right about more than just the formula. Maybe I had been overthinking things, letting first-time mother anxiety cloud my judgment about normal infant development. The party continued around us, filled with laughter and conversation and the comfortable noise of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. I checked my phone for messages from David, hoping for one of his brief updates from whatever classified location his current assignment had taken him to, but the screen showed no new notification. Communication was always limited during his deployments, and I'd learned not to expect regular contact. The military didn't operate on family schedules, and his position required the kind of focus that left little room for personal concern. Around 8:30, as the party was winding down and guests were beginning to say their goodbyes, Emma suddenly went rigid in my arms. Not the normal startled reflex that babies sometimes displayed, but something else entirely. Something that made every maternal instinct I possessed scream that something was terribly wrong. Her tiny body began convulsing with violent spasms that shook her entire frame. Her eyes rolled back until only the whites were visible, and foam started appearing at the corners of her mouth. The peaceful baby who'd been sleeping so contentedly just moments before, was now having a full-scale seizure in front of 70 horrified party guests. "Something's wrong," I screamed, my voice cutting through the celebratory chatter like a knife. "Call 911. Emma's having a seizure." The room erupted into controlled chaos as multiple people reached for their phones while others cleared space around us. Dad appeared at my side immediately, his postal service training in emergency procedures kicking in as he helped me position Emma safely while we waited for medical help. "What happened?" Mom asked, her face pale with terror as she watched her granddaughter's small body fight against whatever was attacking her system. "She was fine just a few minutes ago. She was sleeping peacefully." "I don't know," I said, my voice breaking as Emma's convulsions continued. "She had her bottle and seemed so much better, and then this started." That's when I noticed Rachel, standing behind the dessert table with an expression that chilled me to the bone. She wasn't panicking like everyone else. She wasn't rushing to help or offering suggestions. She was watching Emma's seizure with the clinical detachment of someone observing expected results from a planned experiment. And in that moment I knew with absolute certainty that my sister had poisoned my baby. The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, their sirens cutting through the suburban evening quiet like a declaration of war against whatever had attacked my daughter. They worked on Emma right there on the VFW hall floor, surrounded by overturned chairs and scattered party decorations, while 70 witnesses watched in stunned silence. The lead paramedic, a woman in her 40s with steady hands and kind eyes, started an IV in Emma's tiny arm while asking rapid-fire questions about her medical history and what she'd consumed in the hours before the seizure. I answered as best I could through my panic, but my mind kept circling back to that bottle Rachel had prepared, to the way she'd positioned herself behind the dessert table like she was waiting for something to happen. When the paramedic asked specifically about new foods or medications, I hesitated for just a moment before mentioning the formula sample Rachel had given me. "Do you still have the bottle?" the paramedic asked, her tone shifting slightly as she continued working to stabilize Emma's vital signs. I pointed to where I'd set it down when the seizure started, and she immediately bagged it as potential evidence. That single action told me everything I needed to know about how seriously they were taking the possibility that Emma had been deliberately harmed. The ride to Arlington Memorial Hospital passed in a blur of medical equipment and urgent radio communications. Emma remained unconscious, her breathing supported by a pediatric ventilator that covered most of her tiny face. I held her hand and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep, that Mommy would fix this, that Daddy would come home soon, that everything would be okay. At the hospital they rushed Emma directly into the pediatric intensive care unit, while I stood in the corridor answering questions from nurses, doctors, and eventually a police officer who'd been called because of the suspicious circumstances surrounding an infant's sudden illness. The bottle Rachel had prepared was handed over to the toxicology lab, along with samples of Emma's blood and urine that would hopefully identify whatever had caused the seizure. Patterson arrived within an hour, her usually calm demeanor replaced by the focused intensity that came with treating a critically ill child. She explained that Emma's condition was consistent with toxic exposure, that something had interfered with her nervous system in a way that suggested deliberate poisoning rather than accidental contamination. "The good news is that we caught it early," she said, reviewing Emma's latest test results. "Her vital signs are stabilizing, and the seizure activity has stopped completely. Whatever she was exposed to, it appears to be working its way out of her system. Will there be lasting effects?" I asked, watching Emma sleep peacefully in the hospital bed that dwarfed her small form. "It's too early to tell definitively, but her neurological responses look normal. Children are remarkably resilient, especially when they receive prompt medical intervention." Patterson sat down in the chair next to me, her expression growing more serious. "Jessica, I need to ask you some difficult questions about who had access to Emma today, and specifically about that bottle the paramedics brought in." I told her about Rachel's offer to help, about the formula sample from Children's National, about how enthusiastically Emma had drunk from the bottle before falling asleep. I also told her about Rachel's strange reaction to the seizure, the way she'd stood apart from everyone else with that clinical detachment that still made my skin crawl. "We'll know more when the toxicology results come back," Dr. Patterson said. "But Jessica, if someone deliberately gave Emma something harmful, this becomes a criminal investigation. You need to be prepared for that possibility." The police officer who'd been waiting patiently in the hallway stepped forward. Detective Morrison was a soft-spoken man in his 50s, who specialized in crimes against children, and his gentle approach couldn't mask the steel beneath his questions. "Mrs. Miller, I understand your sister provided the bottle that Emma drank from before becoming ill. Can you tell me about your relationship with Rachel Thompson, and whether there's been any recent conflict or tension between you?" I thought about all the small comments Rachel had made over the years, the passive-aggressive observations about my marriage, my parenting choices, my decision to leave nursing for full-time motherhood. Nothing that seemed significant enough to motivate attempted murder, but a pattern of resentment that I'd been too close to see clearly. "She's always been competitive," I said finally, "critical of my choices, especially since Emma was born. But I never thought she'd actually hurt someone, especially not a baby." Detective Morrison made notes in a small notebook, his expression giving nothing away. "We'll need to interview everyone who was at the party tonight, get statements about what they observed. In the meantime, I'd recommend limiting contact with your sister until we know more about what happened." The suggestion felt both necessary and heartbreaking. Rachel and I had our differences, but she was still family. The idea that she might have deliberately poisoned Emma was so far outside my understanding of normal human behavior that I kept looking for alternative explanations, even as the evidence pointed toward an inescapable conclusion. My phone rang around midnight, startling me from the exhausted doze I'd fallen into beside Emma's bed. David's name appeared on the screen, and I felt a rush of relief mixed with dread. "How do you tell your deployed husband that someone tried to murder his daughter?" "Jeff, I got an emergency message that Emma was hospitalized. What happened? Is she okay?" The satellite connection made his voice sound distant and distorted, but I could hear the worry underneath the stat. I gave him the basics as calmly as I could manage, explaining about the party, the seizure, the suspicious bottle that Rachel had prepared. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we'd lost the connection. When David finally spoke, his voice had changed completely. Not the gentle, concerned husband I'd expected, but something colder and infinitely more dangerous. "Jessica, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Are you somewhere private where you can talk freely?" I looked around the PICU, noting the nurses at their station and the other families dealing with their own medical crises. "I'm in Emma's room, but there are people around. Find somewhere completely private. This is important." I walked to a small family conference room down the hall and closed the door behind me. "Okay, I'm alone. First, I want you to know that Emma is going to be fine. We're going to make sure of that. Second, I need you to save that bottle and any other evidence from tonight. Don't let anyone else handle them except the medical team and the police. They're evidence now." "Evidence of what, David? What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that your sister made a very serious mistake tonight, and she's about to discover what happens when someone attacks a military family with the resources to fight back." The cold certainty in his voice sent chills down my spine. I'd always known David's work was classified, that his position at the Pentagon involved more than the desk job I'd imagined, but I'd never heard him speak with this kind of deadly precision. "What kind of resources?" I asked. "The kind that can find out everything about a person's life, track their movements, monitor their communications, and build criminal cases that destroy people completely. His voice softened slightly. Jess, I love you and I love our daughter, and I'm coming home. But your deployment, your assignment, is secondary to protecting my family. I'm initiating emergency leave protocols that will have me on a transport within 12 hours. But before I get there are some calls I need to make, some assets I need to activate. The line went quiet for a moment, and when David spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. Your sister has no idea who she's dealing with, but she's about to find out. This ends tomorrow. After we hung up, I sat in that small conference room staring at my phone and trying to process what David had just told me. My husband wasn't just another Pentagon analyst. He was someone with access to resources that could destroy people completely, someone who could mobilize assets and initiate protocols that sounded more like military operations than family emergency. I returned to Emma's room to find her awake and alert, looking around with curious eyes that showed no obvious signs of neurological damage. Dr. Patterson was reviewing her latest test results with a cautiously optimistic expression. The toxicology preliminary came back, she said, showing me a report filled with medical terminology I only partially understood. Emma was exposed to a synthetic compound that affects the central nervous system. It's not something that occurs naturally, and it's not found in any legitimate infant formula. What does that mean exactly? It means someone deliberately added a dangerous substance to her bottle. This wasn't an accident or contamination from the manufacturing process. This was attempted poisoning. The words hit me like physical blows. My sister had looked into Emma's innocent face and decided to use her as a weapon against me. The why didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that Emma had survived, and that the people responsible would face consequences for what they'd done. Detective Morrison returned early the next morning with additional questions and some preliminary information from his investigation. They'd interviewed multiple party guests, all of whom confirmed that Rachel had been the only person to handle Emma's bottle before I fed it to her. They'd also discovered that the formula sample hadn't come from Children's National Hospital, which had no record of providing any samples to medical device representatives. We're treating this as attempted murder, Detective Morrison said bluntly. The compound found in your daughter's system is extremely dangerous and difficult to obtain. We're working with federal authorities to trace its source. When someone attempts to harm the child of a military family using sophisticated chemical compounds, it becomes a matter of national security. The FBI has joined the investigation. As if summoned by his words, a woman in a dark suit appeared in the doorway. Agent Sarah Williams was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of alertness that suggested she'd been awake for more than 24 hours. Mrs. Miller, I'm Agent Williams with the FBI. I understand your husband is Colonel David Miller with Pentagon Intelligence. Yes, he's deployed overseas right now, but he's arranging emergency leave. Actually, he's not deployed anymore. His transport landed at Andrews Air Force Base 20 minutes ago. Agent Williams consulted her phone. He should be here within the hour. The efficiency of David's return was staggering. Less than 12 hours after learning about the attack on Emma, he'd managed to extract himself from whatever classified operation he'd been involved in and arrange military transport back to the state. That kind of rapid response suggested resources and authority levels I'd never fully understood. Agent Williams, what exactly is the FBI's interest in this case? Your sister's method of obtaining the compound used to poison Emma connects to a larger investigation we've been conducting into medical fraud and illegal substance distribution. Her actions may have exposed a network we've been tracking for months. The scope of what Agent Williams was describing felt surreal. Emma's poisoning wasn't just an isolated act of family violence. It was connected to broader criminal activities that the FBI had been investigating independently. Rachel hadn't just tried to murder my daughter. She'd potentially blown her own cover in some larger scheme. What kind of network? I pressed. Medical device representatives who use their access to hospitals and clinical settings to distribute illegal substances for various purposes. Some of it is black market pharmaceuticals, but some of it is more sinister. Compounds designed to cause symptoms that look like natural illnesses or accidents. The implications were staggering. Rachel's attack on Emma wasn't just personal revenge. It might have been part of a systematic operation involving multiple victims and a network of criminals using medical credentials to harm people while avoiding detection. Agent Williams opened a tablet and showed me surveillance photos of Rachel entering various hospitals and medical facilities over the past several months. In each image, she was carrying the same professional briefcase and wearing the confident expression of someone conducting legitimate business.
We've been tracking unusual patterns of unexplained illnesses in pediatric units where your sister has had access. The compound found in Emma's system matches substances detected in several other cases that were initially attributed to natural causes. Other children, The question came out as barely a whisper. We're still investigating, but it's possible Emma wasn't the first child your sister targeted. She may have been using her medical device sales position to gain access to vulnerable patients for months or even years. The revelation that Rachel might be a serial killer rather than just a jealous sister driven to one terrible act changed everything. Emma's survival wasn't just about family justice anymore. It was about stopping someone who'd been systematically harming children while hiding behind professional credentials and family relationships. My phone buzzed with a text from David. 5 minutes out. Is Emma stable? I replied quickly. She's doing much better. FBI here. Agent Williams will brief you. Agent Williams nodded approvingly. Your husband's security clearance will give us access to resources that can accelerate this investigation significantly. We'll be able to track your sister's movements, monitor her communications, and build a comprehensive case much faster than through normal channels. What happens now? Now we let your sister think she's gotten away with it. We monitor her activities, see if she tries to cover her tracks or contact anyone else involved in the network. And we build an airtight case that will put her and anyone working with her in federal prison for the rest of their lives. The elevator doors opened, and David strode down the hallway still wearing his military fatigues from the transport flight. The transformation in his bearing was immediately apparent. This wasn't the gentle husband and father who'd left for deployment 6 weeks ago. This was a military officer who'd spent years learning how to neutralize threats to national security. And he was bringing every bit of that expertise to bear on the person who'd tried to murder his daughter. He went directly to Emma's bedside, his expression softening as he took in her peaceful appearance and the steady readings on her monitors. She opened her eyes at his voice and smiled the kind of radiant baby smile that made all the terror of the past 18 hours seem manageable. Hey there, princess, he murmured, gently stroking her cheek. Daddy's home, and Daddy's going to make sure nothing like this ever happens again. Then he turned to Agent Williams with the focused intensity that had made him successful in military intelligence. What do we know about the network Rachel's involved with? And what resources do you need to take them down completely? Agent Williams smiled with the satisfaction of someone who'd just gained access to capabilities that would revolutionize her investigation. Colonel Miller, I think this is the beginning of a very productive partnership. As they began discussing tactical approaches and resource allocation, I held Emma close and marveled at how quickly our quiet suburban life had transformed into something resembling a military operation. But for the first time since finding my daughter convulsing at Dad's retirement party, I felt genuinely hopeful. Rachel had made the mistake of attacking a family with the resources to fight back, and she was about to discover that some battles were impossible to win. The late morning sun streamed through Emma's hospital room windows as David and Agent Williams finalized their strategic approach to dismantling whatever network Rachel had been operating within. Their conversation was filled with terminology I didn't fully understand, references to surveillance protocols and intelligence gathering that reminded me just how much of David's professional life remained classified even from his own wife. Emma was responding beautifully to treatment, her vital signs stable and her neurological responses completely normal. Patterson had been cautiously optimistic about discharging her later that day if her condition continued to improve, which meant we'd soon be dealing with this crisis from home rather than the relative security of the hospital. The compound used to poison Emma is extremely sophisticated, Agent Williams explained, showing us chemical analysis reports on her tablet. It's designed to cause seizures and neurological damage that would be difficult to trace back to external sources. Most emergency rooms would initially treat this as a natural medical event rather than attempted murder. David studied the reports with the systematic attention he brought to all intelligence briefings. How many other cases have you connected to this compound? David studied satellite images of our neighborhood that showed the positioning of federal surveillance teams. What are the chances she brings additional compounds with her tomorrow? Could she be planning another attempt? It's possible she may want to ensure that Emma is actually dead. Or she may be planning to poison other family members to eliminate potential witnesses. We'll be prepared for any contingency. That night, I lay awake listening to Emma breathe through the baby monitor, marveling at how normal her sleep sounds were after coming so close to losing her forever. The federal protection around our house was invisible but comprehensive, making our home probably the safest place in Arlington for a family dealing with threats from sophisticated criminals. David was equally restless, alternating between checking security systems and reviewing intelligence reports about Rachel's activities. His military training had prepared him for complex operations, but protecting his own family from attack by a relative created emotional complications that no amount of tactical expertise could fully address. Do you think she'll confess? I asked quietly. If we confront her directly about what she did to Emma? People like Rachel don't confess, David replied. They deflect, they minimize, they create alternative narratives that make them victims rather than perpetrators. But she might reveal information about her network if she thinks we're too grief-stricken to be suspicious of her explanations. The morning of Rachel's visit arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Northern Virginia beautiful and deceptive. From our windows, the neighborhood looked exactly as it always had, with commuters heading to work and children waiting for school buses. The only signs of the federal operation surrounding our house were subtle equipment adjustments that could have been routine maintenance or utility work. Agent Williams called with final instructions as we prepared for Rachel's arrival. Remember, you're grieving parents who appreciate family support but aren't thinking clearly enough to ask difficult questions. Let her guide the conversation, respond to her suggestions, and don't volunteer information about medical details or investigation progress. Emma was napping peacefully in her crib, completely unaware that her existence had to be concealed from someone who'd tried to murder her. David had installed additional monitoring equipment in her room that would alert us immediately if anyone approached while we were occupied with Rachel's visit. At precisely 10 o'clock, Rachel's silver sedan pulled into our driveway. She emerged wearing a dark blue dress appropriate for offering condolences, carrying a large purse and what appeared to be a gift bag. Her expression was perfectly calibrated to convey sorrowful sympathy as she approached our front door. I answered her knock with the posture and demeanor of someone who'd been crying intermittently for days. Rachel immediately enveloped me in what appeared to be a compassionate embrace, but I could feel her scanning the house behind me for signs of Emma's continued presence. "Oh, Jessica, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, her voice carrying exactly the right emotional tone. "I brought some things that might help during this difficult time." She handed me the gift bag, which contained sympathy cards, herbal tea, and what appeared to be samples of anxiety medication. The inclusion of pharmaceuticals in her condolence offerings felt particularly sinister, given what we now knew about her methods of harming people. "That's very thoughtful," I said, accepting the bag without examining its contents too closely. "Would you like some coffee? I think I have some made." We settled in the living room where Emma had been playing just an hour earlier. Rachel's eyes moved systematically around the space, taking inventory of toys, baby equipment, and family photos that would need to be hidden if we were actually dealing with a child's death. "Where's David?" she asked, maintaining the concerned family member tone. I was hoping to offer my condolences to him as well. He's still trying to get emergency leave. The military bureaucracy is complicated when someone's deployed to a classified location. He might not make it back in time for the funeral arrangement. Rachel nodded sympathetically, but I noticed her relaxing slightly at the confirmation that David remained overseas and uninvolved in handling Emma's supposed death. "Have you thought about what kind of service you'd like to have?" she asked. "I know it's difficult to make decisions when you're grieving, but sometimes family can help with the logistics." The question felt like preparation for offering specific assistance that would give her access to additional family members or opportunities to cause further harm. Agent Williams had warned us that people involved in systematic criminal activities often used funerals and family gatherings to identify new targets. "I haven't been able to think about it yet," I said. "Everything still feels surreal, like this can't actually be happening." "That's completely normal. Grief affects everyone differently, and sudden losses are especially difficult to process." Rachel's response sounded practiced, like something she'd said to other families in similar circumstances. "But the evidence is so comprehensive that defense attorneys will have limited options for challenging the charges. This network's systematic documentation of their crimes will ensure convictions for everyone involved." Mrs. Rodriguez stopped by that afternoon to check on our family's recovery from what she believed was Emma's death. Her genuine grief over the loss of a baby she'd watched grow and develop was heartbreaking, especially when contrasted with Rachel's calculated manipulation of family sympathy. "I brought some soup," she said, her eyes red from crying. "I know food doesn't help with grief, but I wanted to do something practical to support you during this terrible time." I accepted her kindness gratefully while struggling with the knowledge that we couldn't yet reveal Emma's survival without compromising the ongoing prosecution. Rodriguez's authentic concern for our family's welfare demonstrated the fundamental difference between normal human compassion and the predatory behavior we'd confronted from Rachel's network. "The funeral service was beautiful," I said, following the deception script that federal authorities required us to maintain. "Small and private, just immediate family, but it helped provide some closure. I'm sorry I couldn't attend. I would have liked to pay my respects to such a beautiful little girl." After she left, I felt the emotional weight of maintaining our deception with people who genuinely cared about our family's welfare. The investigation's success was protecting hundreds of other families from similar attacks, but the personal cost of pretending Emma was dead while building criminal cases felt increasingly difficult to sustain. Agent Williams called that evening with news that would finally allow us to end our elaborate deception. Federal prosecutors had gathered sufficient evidence to proceed with trials for all arrested network members, eliminating the need for continued surveillance or intelligence gathering through our family's cooperation. As of tomorrow, you can resume normal family life, she announced. Emma's survival can be revealed publicly, and you can begin rebuilding your routines without federal protection or ongoing investigation requirements. The relief I felt at being able to stop pretending my daughter was dead was overwhelming. For weeks, we'd maintained an elaborate fiction that had protected other families while helping prosecute criminals, but the emotional toll had been significant for everyone involved. What about media attention? David asked, will Emma's survival become part of public coverage about the network's arrests? Federal prosecutors want to minimize publicity about specific families to protect your privacy and prevent potential retaliation from associates we haven't identified yet. Your cooperation will be acknowledged in general terms, but specific details about Emma's poisoning and survival will remain confidential. The promise of privacy protection felt crucial for maintaining normal family life while dealing with the long-term consequences of Rachel's criminal activities. Emma deserved to grow up without constant reminders of her aunt's attempt to murder her or the federal investigation that had followed. David coordinated with his Pentagon supervisors to arrange extended family leave that would allow him to participate in prosecution proceedings while maintaining his military career obligations. His security clearance had been instrumental in accelerating the investigation, and his continued involvement would help ensure that all network members received appropriate sentences. The following morning, I woke to the sound of Emma babbling happily in her crib, completely unaware that she could finally exist openly without federal deception requirement. Her survival had triggered a law enforcement response that dismantled a criminal enterprise and saved hundreds of other children from similar attacks. I called Mrs. Rodriguez to share the miraculous news that Emma had survived her medical crisis and was making a complete recovery. Her tears of joy and relief were genuine expressions of love for our family that stood in stark contrast to Rachel's manipulative performances of sympathy. I knew in my heart that baby was too strong to give up, Mrs. Rodriguez said through her tears. She's always been such a fighter, so determined and curious about everything around her. The neighborhood celebration of Emma's survival felt like a return to normal community life after weeks of federal surveillance and criminal investigation. Children played in yards where agents had been positioned. Neighbors resumed casual conversations that hadn't been monitored for intelligence purposes, and our house could finally function as a family home rather than an operational center for law enforcement activity. Agent Williams made a final visit to remove federal surveillance equipment and provide information about upcoming legal proceedings. The transition from active investigation to prosecution phase would require our continued cooperation, but without the intensive monitoring and deception requirements that had characterized the past month. Your family's courage in participating in this investigation has resulted in the largest prosecution of child murder networks in federal history, she told us. 47 families will finally understand what really happened to their children, and hundreds of other families will be protected from similar attacks. David reviewed the prosecution timeline that federal attorneys had established for bringing network members to trial. The legal proceedings would extend over several years, but the evidence was so comprehensive that defense strategies would be limited and convictions virtually certain. What happens to the families whose children were murdered? How do they cope with learning that their grief was deliberately caused by criminals? Federal Victim Services will provide counseling and support for families affected by the network's activities. Agent Williams replied, many will find relief in understanding that their children's deaths weren't their fault, but some will struggle with the knowledge that they were deliberately targeted for manipulation and harm. The complexity of emotions that other families would experience when learning the truth about their children's murders felt overwhelming to consider. Our family had been fortunate that Emma survived, but dozens of other families would have to process the reality that their babies had been killed by people who profited from their grief. Emma's first birthday party that weekend felt like a celebration of survival and justice rather than just normal developmental milestone. Family members who'd mourned her supposed death gathered to marvel at her continued growth and development, while federal prosecutors prepared cases that would ensure her attempted murderers never had opportunities to harm other children. Dad struggled with the revelation that his older daughter had been involved in systematic child murder, questioning whether he'd missed warning signs or failed to provide guidance that might have prevented Rachel's criminal activity. His grief over losing the daughter he thought he knew was complicated by relief that Emma had survived and pride in our family's cooperation with federal authorities. "I keep thinking about all the family gatherings where Rachel seemed normal," he said, watching Emma play with toys on the living room floor. "How many times was she planning attacks on other people's children while pretending to care about our family's welfare?" Mom was equally devastated by the scope of Rachel's crimes, particularly the systematic way she'd manipulated grieving families during their most vulnerable moments. Her maternal instincts had been completely deceived by someone who specialized in exploiting parental love and concern for personal profit. "She used everything I taught her about compassion and family support to hurt innocent people," Mom said through tears. "All those conversations about helping others during difficult times, she turned into weapons against families who trusted her." The family's healing process would require extensive counseling and support to address the trauma of discovering that someone they'd loved and trusted had been capable of such systematic evil. But Emma's survival provided hope that love and resilience could overcome even the most sophisticated attempts to destroy family bonds. Federal prosecutors contacted us monthly with updates about the legal proceedings against network members. Rachel's trial was scheduled for early the following year, with federal attorneys confident that the evidence would support multiple life sentences for her role in coordinating child murders across several states. "The conspiracy charges alone carry mandatory life imprisonment," the lead prosecutor explained during a preparation meeting. "Combined with the individual murder charges and racketeering allegations, she'll never see the outside of federal prison again." The certainty of Rachel's conviction and permanent imprisonment provided closure for our family's direct involvement in the criminal case. Emma would grow up knowing that the person who'd tried to harm her faced appropriate consequences, and that her survival had helped protect hundreds of other children from similar attacks. 6 months after Rachel's arrest, Agent Williams called with final statistics about the investigation's impact. Federal authorities had prevented 43 planned attacks on children by dismantling the network before additional murders could be committed. The prosecution had resulted in life sentences for 38 defendants, with the remaining cases still proceeding through federal courts. "Your family's cooperation in this investigation has had generational impact," she told. "Children who would have been murdered by this network will grow up to have families of their own, continuing cycles of life that criminals tried to destroy for profit." Emma's development continued normally despite the extraordinary circumstances surrounding her survival. She learned to walk, began speaking her first words, and displayed the curiosity and intelligence that made every day with her a joy for David and me. Her personality showed no lasting effects from the poisoning attempt, testament to children's remarkable resilience when provided with appropriate medical care and family support. The final legal proceedings concluded on Emma's second birthday, with Rachel receiving 6 consecutive life sentences without possibility of parole for her role in the child murder network. Federal prosecutors had successfully demonstrated that she'd been instrumental in coordinating attacks that killed dozens of children while providing chemical compounds and targeting intelligence for criminal associates. "Justice has been served," David said, reading news coverage of the sentencing while Emma played happily with birthday presents from family and neighbors. "The people who tried to harm our daughter will never have the opportunity to threaten other families." As I watched Emma explore her new toys with the enthusiasm that characterized everything she approached, I felt grateful for the federal agents, prosecutors, and military personnel who'd worked to protect our family and ensure that justice was served. Her survival had triggered a law enforcement response that ultimately saved hundreds of other children from criminal attacks. The neighborhood had returned to normal rhythms of family life, with children playing safely in yards where federal surveillance teams had once been positioned. Ms. Rodriguez continued providing the practical support that made military family life manageable, and our community relationships had strengthened through shared concern for Emma's welfare. David's military career had been enhanced rather than damaged by his role in the investigation, with his security clearance and tactical expertise being recognized as instrumental in dismantling the criminal network. His commitment to protecting his family had aligned perfectly with his professional obligations to defend against threats to national security. Emma would grow up in a world where people like Rachel and her criminal associates found it much more difficult to operate undetected. Federal law enforcement had developed new protocols for investigating unexplained infant deaths, and medical professionals had received training to recognize signs of deliberate poisoning that might have been missed in previous cases. The morning after Rachel's sentencing, I received a letter from Maria Santos, whose daughter Isabella had been one of Rachel's early victims. Her words expressed gratitude for our family's cooperation in the investigation and hoped that justice for their children would help all affected families begin healing from the trauma they'd endured. Knowing that Isabella's death helped expose this network and prevent other murders gives meaning to our loss, she wrote. Your daughter's survival provided the evidence needed to ensure that these criminals face appropriate consequences for their crime. Reading her letter while watching Emma play peacefully in our living room, I felt the weight of responsibility that came with surviving when others hadn't been as fortunate. Emma's life carried forward the memory of children who'd been murdered by the same people who'd tried to harm her, and her continued development represented victory over forces that had tried to destroy innocent families. That evening, as David and I tucked Emma into her crib for another peaceful night's sleep, we whispered promises that she would grow up surrounded by love and protection, with the knowledge that evil had been confronted and defeated when it threatened our family. The federal protection was gone, the surveillance equipment removed, and the criminal trials concluded. Our house had returned to being simply a home where a military family raised their daughter with the support of neighbors and friends who genuinely cared about their welfare. Emma slept soundly, breathing peacefully through the night without any remaining effects from the poisoning that had nearly taken her life. Her survival had triggered a federal response that dismantled a criminal network and saved hundreds of other children from similar attacks. Justice had been served, our family was safe, and tomorrow would bring new opportunities for normal life to continue growing stronger than the evil that had tried to destroy it. The people who'd turned child murder into a profitable business were spending the rest of their lives in federal prison, while Emma continued developing into the remarkable person she was meant to become. 5 years after Rachel's final sentencing, I stood in the kitchen of our new home in Colorado Springs, watching Emma practice writing her name at the breakfast table while David prepared for another day at his Pentagon liaison position. The morning routine felt beautifully ordinary, filled with the small negotiations and gentle chaos that characterized family life with a 7-year-old who had opinions about everything from cereal choices to sock selection. Emma had grown into a confident, inquisitive child whose personality showed no shadows from the trauma she'd survived as an infant. Her teachers described her as empathetic and protective of younger children, qualities that might have developed naturally or could have been influenced by growing up in a family that understood how precious and fragile childhood safety could be. She had no conscious memory of the poisoning attempt, but sometimes I wondered if some deeper part of her psyche retained awareness of the love and determination that had fought to keep her alive. The relocation to Colorado had provided our family with a fresh start away from the Washington area where federal courtrooms and media coverage had made normal life challenging during the prosecution year. David's transfer to Cheyenne Mountain had been professionally advantageous while offering Emma the opportunity to grow up surrounded by military families who understood the unique challenges and strengths that came with serving your country while raising children. Our new neighborhood felt remarkably similar to the Arlington community we'd left behind, filled with families whose routines revolved around deployments and homecomings, who celebrated promotions and mourned losses together with the solidarity that military life created. The difference was that here, Emma could simply be another military child rather than the survivor of a high-profile criminal case that had generated years of legal proceedings and media attention. Miss Chen, our neighbor across the street, had become Emma's unofficial grandmother figure, much like Mrs. Rodriguez had been in Virginia. She brought the same practical wisdom and genuine affection that made military communities feel like extended families, watching Emma get off the school bus and offering homework help when David and I were managing work obligations. The continuity of care that military neighborhoods provided had been crucial for maintaining Emma's sense of security and belonging. The kitchen wall displayed Emma's latest artwork, colorful drawings of families and animals that reflected a child's optimistic view of the world around her. Mixed among her creations were photographs from family vacations, school events, and military ceremonies that documented a normal childhood progressing through all the expected milestones. Looking at this visual record of Emma's development, it was impossible to imagine the federal investigation and criminal trials that had dominated our family's life during her early years. David had thrived professionally since the network investigation concluded, with his role in dismantling the criminal enterprise, enhancing his reputation within military intelligence circles. His expertise in coordinating complex operations with federal law enforcement agencies had led to additional assignments that leveraged his unique experience managing threats against military families. The Pentagon had recognized that his personal investment in protecting children from criminal networks made him particularly effective at developing security protocols that other families could rely on. My own career had evolved in unexpected directions following Emma's survival. The experience of navigating federal investigations while maintaining normal family functioning had led to consulting opportunities with victim advocacy organizations and law enforcement agencies developing protocols for supporting families during complex criminal cases. The emotional expertise I'd gained from our ordeal had become professionally valuable in ways I'd never anticipated. The work felt meaningful because it helped other families avoid some of the confusion and isolation we'd experienced during the investigation phase. Every family facing similar circumstances could benefit from guidance about managing media attention, coordinating with federal agencies, and maintaining children's emotional stability during extended legal proceedings. Our experience had taught us lessons that could spare other families some of the secondary trauma that criminal cases often inflicted on victims. Emma's school had been carefully selected for its experience working with military families and its commitment to maintaining student privacy regardless of family circumstance. The teachers and administrators understood that some children carried histories that required sensitive handling, and they had created environments where Emma could focus on normal academic and social development without unwanted attention or curiosity about her family's background. Her closest friends knew that her daddy worked at an important military job, and that her family had lived in lots of different places, but they had no awareness of criminal trials or attempted murder. This carefully maintained normalcy allowed Emma to develop friendships based on shared interests and compatible personalities rather than the notoriety that had followed our family during the prosecution year. The mail that morning included a letter from the Federal Victim Services Coordinator providing an annual update about the ongoing impact of the criminal network's dismantling. Over the past 5 years, the protocols developed during our investigation had helped identify and prevent 47 additional cases where children were targeted by similar criminal operations. The legislative changes that federal prosecutors had advocated following the trials had made it significantly more difficult for medical professionals to abuse their access to vulnerable families. Reading these updates always created mixed emotions of satisfaction about the positive changes that had resulted from Emma's survival and sadness about the families who hadn't been as fortunate as ours. The knowledge that dozens of children had been murdered by people who turned family tragedy into profitable business would never stop being heartbreaking, even when justice had been served and preventive measures implemented. David reviewed the update while finishing his morning coffee, noting that 3 additional network associates had been identified and arrested based on evidence that continued emerging from the original investigation. The criminal enterprise had been more extensive than initially understood, with tentacles reaching into medical communities across multiple regions of the country. They're still finding people who were connected to Rachel's network, he observed, scanning the report about recent arrests in Florida and Texas. The investigation team estimates that the full scope of their operations may have involved over 200 murders across a 15-year period. The magnitude of the criminal conspiracy that had nearly claimed Emma's life remained staggering to contemplate. Our family had stumbled into the periphery of a sophisticated operation that had been systematically murdering children while avoiding detection through careful target selection and professional medical cover story. Emma's survival had been the crucial break that allowed federal authorities to unravel crimes that might otherwise have continued indefinitely. Emma looked up from her writing practice with the serious expression she wore when processing adult conversations that touched on topics beyond her complete understanding. "Daddy, are the bad people still in jail?" "Yes, sweet. The bad people are in jail forever, and they can't hurt any more children." "Good. I don't like people who hurt babies." Her matter-of-fact response reflected the simplified explanation we'd provided about why our family had been involved with police and lawyers during her early childhood. Emma understood that some people had tried to hurt children, that her daddy and mommy had helped catch them, and that justice meant the bad people faced consequences that prevented them from causing additional harm.
The conversation reminded me of the careful balance we'd maintained between age-appropriate honesty about serious topics and protection of Emma's innocence about the specific details of her own experience. She would eventually learn the complete truth about Rachel's attempt to murder her, but that knowledge could wait until she was emotionally mature enough to process such information without developing fears or trust issues that might interfere with normal relationships. David's phone buzzed with a secure message from his Pentagon supervisor, and he reviewed it with the focused attention that indicated official business requiring immediate response. The message contained a request for his consultation on a developing case where another military family was dealing with suspicious circumstances surrounding their child's illness. Similar pattern to what we experienced, I asked, recognizing the expression he wore when confronting threats against children.
Early stages, but some concerning similarities. They want me to review the medical evidence and family interviews to determine whether federal resources should be activated. His continued involvement in protecting other military families from criminal threats felt like a natural extension of the skills he'd developed during our own crisis. The Pentagon had recognized that his unique combination of intelligence expertise and personal experience made him particularly effective at identifying cases where children might be targeted by sophisticated criminal operations. The work also provided our family with ongoing purpose that extended beyond normal military service obligation. Emma's survival had equipped us with knowledge and capabilities that could help protect other children from similar attacks, creating meaning from trauma that transformed our experience into something beneficial for the broader military community. After David left for work and Emma departed for school, I spent the morning reviewing materials for a presentation I would be giving to a victim advocacy conference about supporting families during complex federal investigations. The speaking engagement was part of my consulting work that had developed from our experience navigating the legal system, while maintaining family stability during criminal proceedings. The presentation would focus on practical strategies for managing media attention, coordinating with federal agencies, and maintaining children's emotional well-being during extended legal processes. Every family facing similar circumstances could benefit from guidance that helped them avoid some of the secondary trauma and confusion that criminal cases often created for victims. The work felt meaningful because it transformed our difficult experience into resources that could help other families cope more effectively with similar challenges. Emma's survival had given us knowledge that could spare other children and parents some of the isolation and uncertainty we'd experienced during the investigation and prosecution phases. That afternoon, Emma returned from school with artwork she'd created during a unit about community helpers, featuring colorful drawings of police officers, firefighters, and soldiers who protected people from danger. Her teacher had included a note praising Emma's understanding of how different people work together to keep communities safe, knowledge that probably reflected conversations we'd had about the federal agents and prosecutors who'd helped our family during our crisis. Mrs. Patterson said my picture of the police officer was really good, Emma announced proudly, showing me her drawing of a figure wearing a badge and standing next to a car marked with emergency lights. I told her that police officers helped my family when I was little. Her casual reference to law enforcement assistance during her early childhood reflected the normalized way she'd processed our family's interaction with federal authorities. Rather than developing fear or mistrust of officials, Emma had absorbed the message that police officers and federal agents were helpers who protected families from people who wanted to cause harm. The evening news included a brief report about additional arrests connected to the criminal network that had targeted our family years earlier. Federal prosecutors announced that ongoing investigations had identified connections between the original conspiracy and similar operations in other states, leading to expanded prosecutions that would address crimes spanning nearly 2 decades. Watching the news coverage while Emma played nearby, I felt grateful that our family's ordeal had contributed to justice for so many other victims while leading to systemic changes that would protect future children from similar threats. The suffering we'd endured during the investigation and trial phases had generated long-term benefits that extended far beyond our individual circumstances. David called during dinner to report that his consultation on the developing case had led to federal intervention that prevented what appeared to be a planned attack on a military family in North Carolina. The early identification and prevention of the threat demonstrated how the protocols developed during our investigation continued generating protective benefits for other families. Another child who gets to grow up safely because we learned how to recognize these patterns, he said, his voice carrying the satisfaction that came from meaningful work that aligned with personal values and professional obligation. As we tucked Emma into bed that night, she asked the question that had become part of our routine whenever news reports mentioned police officers or federal agents helping families in danger. Mommy, will the good people always catch the bad people before they hurt children? The good people work very hard to protect children, I replied, providing the reassurance she needed while acknowledging that perfect safety wasn't possible in any world. And when families help the good people do their jobs like we did, it makes everyone safe. Emma nodded with the satisfied expression she wore when receiving explanations that made sense within her understanding of how the world should operate. Her trust in the fundamental goodness of people who dedicated their lives to protecting others reflected the security we'd been able to maintain despite the trauma that had threatened to destroy our family's foundation. After she fell asleep, David and I sat on our back porch watching the Colorado sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple that reminded us why we'd chosen to build our new life in this place. The evening quiet was filled with normal neighborhood sounds of families settling into their routines,
children playing in nearby yards, and the distant traffic that indicated a community functioning safely and peacefully. Our conversation that evening focused on Emma's upcoming 8th birthday and the family vacation we were planning to celebrate another year of normal, healthy development. The milestone felt significant because it marked Emma's transition from the early childhood years when she'd required protection from knowledge about the criminal case to an age where she could begin understanding more complex truths about the world around her. "When do we tell her the complete story about what Rachel did?" I asked, knowing that Emma would eventually need to understand the full scope of what had happened during her infancy. "When she starts asking more detailed questions about why we moved from Virginia and why she doesn't have contact with some family members," David replied. "She's getting old enough to notice that other children have aunts and uncles who visit for holiday." The conversation about timing felt important because we wanted Emma to learn the truth from us rather than discovering it accidentally through internet searches or comments from people who remembered the media coverage from years earlier. Her emotional maturity and sense of security would guide our decision about when she was ready for complete honesty about her aunt's attempt to murder her. Looking back at the 7 years since that terrifying night when we'd found Emma convulsing at Dad's retirement party, I felt amazed by how completely our family had recovered from trauma that could have destroyed us permanently. Emma's survival had been the foundation for everything positive that had followed, from the justice achieved through federal prosecutions to the ongoing work that helped protect other families from similar threats. The criminal network that had nearly claimed our daughter's life had been dismantled completely, with its members serving life sentences that ensured they would never again have opportunities to harm innocent children. The systemic changes implemented following the investigation had made it significantly more difficult for medical professionals to abuse their access to vulnerable families, creating protective benefits that would last for generations. Emma slept peacefully in her bedroom, surrounded by the normal possessions and decorations that characterized a happy childhood, progressing through all the expected milestones. Her survival had triggered a federal response that ultimately saved hundreds of other children from criminal attacks while ensuring that justice was served for families who'd suffered losses we'd been fortunate enough to avoid. Tomorrow would bring another day of ordinary family life, with school and work and neighborhood activities that reflected the security and stability we'd fought to preserve when evil threatened to destroy everything we valued. The people who'd tried to murder our daughter for profit had been defeated completely, while Emma continued growing into the remarkable person she was meant to become. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.